Thank you for joining us here on PM Expert. There is a crisis. It seems like almost every day now we're talking about a crisis. Yesterday we talked about a crisis that has led to a coalition being formed, a rise in civic action. Today there's a real crisis. Which one is real? Well, if you are a student and a parent in a senior high school, so you'll probably be feeling what we are talking about, the food crisis in our senior high schools. But we need to ask a fundamental question. Whilst this crisis is hitting us in our schools, whether it's a food shortage, a food problem in the supply, it's now become pretty erratic, forcing some of the students to go hungry and feeding on very little. Does the current IMF bailout present an opportunity? An opportunity to finally review the free SHS. And that is based on assumption that the food crisis that we are currently experiencing is a result of the burden that free SHS, that policy, has placed on our finances. Well, I have guests tonight who will answer that question. Will they draw a direct link between the challenges we're experiencing currently and the free SHS? But the IMF bailout offers an opportunity. Government itself had said as part of their documents explaining what they're doing with the IMF, something that gives an indication of what they plan to do with policies like free SHS. And so we'll get to that at the end of this presentation. We're quickly going to run through for you today on this. So where are we tonight? We know that the senior high schools are on the verge of shutdown. Why do we know this? Because the conference, the conference of heads of assisted senior high schools have said so, particularly, more specifically, in the Eastern region. We were all alerted to the gravity of the problem by the Upper West Regional Chapter of CHAS. That's the conference of the heads of assisted senior high schools. So the public schools across the country at the senior high school level, their heads in the Upper West region first alerted us to the problem, and they gave a 7-day ultimatum, by the way, that expires in 48 hours. This is Friday. And they were very clear what that is, and that by Friday, they do not get the supplies they need to feed the children, your children, then they'll be forced either to close down the schools or ask for the parents to take the bill and feed their children themselves. And then today, another statement emerged, this time from the Eastern Regional Chapter of the Conference of Heads of Assisted Senior High Schools. Their statement was a bit more specific and gave us a bit more detail about the nature of the problem, right? Because it came today on the back of a promise by government, by the Education Ministry, that the crisis would have been resolved as of Tuesday. We know that they missed that promise. They missed that deadline because the food items were not delivered as promised by the Education Ministry. So what were the specific things that the Eastern Regional Chapter of the CHAS indicated as a problem? They talk about first, food shortages, right? We're now getting to know that the food shortage we are talking about today has been there, has plagued the schools for 2 years. That's not me saying it. This is the heads of assisted senior high schools in the Eastern region saying it. Take their word for it because they head the schools. So what we are talking about, they're saying, it's not a problem that had just emerged in the last few days. It's possible that it's become worse in the last few days, but it has been there for 2 years. Your children in the senior high schools, they've had challenges with food, according to the Eastern Regional Branch of CHAS, that they've had challenges for 2 years. They also told that supply hasn't been in line with the policy directive. So there's a policy directive that specifies how the food should be circulated, and they say it's a problem. Another thing that they talked about in the statement they issued is that releasing funds for perishables in the schools, again, has been in arrears, sometimes for over a year. And then there's this one here that grabbed my attention, reduce weight of food items supplied. So they want, for example, 50 kilograms of, say, rice. But what they get is 25 kilograms. That is what they mean by reduced kilograms. So give me 50 kilograms of rice, and then you give me 25 kilograms of rice. So again, they highlight this as a problem. And then they talk about non-payment and erratic release of funds. In fact, as we speak today, according to the Eastern Regional CHAS, This year, government is in arrears of 6 months. And the whole of 2021 too, there are arrears that are still need to be cleared. We'll get some clarity on the nature of this pretty soon when we speak to my guests on this. So they came to a conclusion, having looked at the problem, that if by Friday, this is 2 days from today, in 48 hours to be more precise, you don't solve the problem, as in government, don't bring the food that the kids need, the children need in the senior high school, they'll have no option than to recommend to the Ghana Education Service to close down the schools in the region. And secondly, get in touch with the parents to either feed their wards themselves or send them home until the situation is normalized. So that would mean effectively close down the schools. If you don't want the schools closed down, then let the parents take up the bill. But that is a problem with free SHS, because free SHS is taking up everything else, right? Feeding of the children, whether you're in boarding house or in day, everybody gets fed. Government is taking up the bill. The chart in the Eastern region says, well, where we are right now with the crisis on the hands with the food, if you don't fix it in 48 hours, then let the parents begin to bear the cost of feeding the children. The Education Ministry, PRO, has given some assurances after the first missed deadline of Tuesday close of day. He admits that there have been challenges with specifically financing, right? Financing. When he says delivery challenge, what he actually explained is the financing has been a challenge, and that there have been delay in the release of funds to suppliers to then supply the schools with the food items they need, the sugar, the milk, the rice, etc. The government has delayed in supplying. So the suppliers have said, listen, we are in arrears for more than a year. We cannot continue to supply the food to the schools, which really is a problem. At the heart of this is the buffer stock company that also is struggling to mobilize everything that the schools need and supply. So really, if you strip all this off, according to the spokesperson of the Education Ministry, it comes down to finance. And indeed, the chart of Eastern Region confirms that arrears is crippling the ability of the state to feed the children, your children, in the senior high school. So that's the problem. But then he assures that the Education Minister has stepped in after the first failed deadline and has now, as of yesterday evening, the trucks were being loaded with 10,000 bags of sugar and 5,000 bags of rice to be dispatched to the schools. I must tell you, we spoke to our correspondents in 3 regions: Eastern region, in the Northern region, and in the Upper West region. This is as of 5:30. And they all tell us that they checked with the schools. And many of the schools they checked, not all the schools in the region, but some of the schools they checked, say they are yet to receive the promised supply. So that is as of 5:30 p.m. Has it changed as of tonight? I don't know. Probably get some clarity on this pretty soon. The parents obviously have been speaking. They're speaking out about this. If you have a child in the senior high school, of course you speak out. And they've called for the closure of the schools. So they let my child come home so I can feed my child myself. Some have said, let us pay for the food. We can afford. Those who can afford say, let us pay for the food that our children need in the schools. But then there's a picture I need to paint for you, right? So how many students possibly are affected by this? You can take that from the total number that the free SHS is covering, 1.2 million students. This is according to the 2022 budget. That's how much we budgeted for. That's how many students we budgeted for. 1,261,495 students. Total number of students benefiting from this free SHS. So potentially, some parts of the country more acute. The problem with the food supply is more acute than others. But potentially, we are talking about 1.2 million students affected by the problem of feeding and food across the country. So that's a significant number indeed. But the question that has always been asked, especially now that we've surrendered to the IMF and say, listen, we are sick as a country economically, IMF bails out, is the burden that the free SHS is putting on our public finances. Because if you look at this is from the Ministry of Finance. In billion, we are talking about in 2022, the budget is 2.3 billion just on the free senior high school funding. So that's a significant amount. Let's put that in context. The e-levy that the government touted as a solution to our current revenue challenges was expected to raise something close to 7 billion cedis, right? Just over 6 billion cedis. Now, if you consider that for 2022, same year that the e-levy was supposed to kick in and raise that amount, we are budgeting to spend 2.3 billion, possibly of that amount. We know that amount is coming from other places, but just in comparison, that tells you that the huge chunk of the money that we are raising as a country is going to the free SHS alone. Not the entire education sector, just the free SHS, right? That's a significant amount. And if you look at the trend, we've been spending this over the period. 2019, 1.68. 2020 is 2.43 in COVID, right? And then it dropped again to 2021 to 1.97 billion and gone back up. So this year is the second highest we've spent on free SHS since we started. And if you look at the weight of the education expenditure, so this year we're budgeting to spend 17.8 billion on education. So that's a significant amount we are spending on education. This is good actually, because the more you spend on education, it has rewards for you. Out of the 17, we know that more than 2 billion is for the free SHS. So the education budget is huge. What can you do about this in the midst of an IMF bailout conversation? So this is what the government had said, and you'll find this in a very bulky document that the finance ministry developed as a form of an explanation document about why government is approaching the IMF and what government plans to do to get IMF to commit resources to help us out of this economic crisis. In that document, it's an FAQ, frequently asked questions. In that document, the government asked the question, what are we going to do? Are we going to suspend free SHS or not? Government is categorical that we will not suspend, the government will not suspend free SHS. However, quote, government in its enhanced domestic program has started a review, so that's a key point, has started a review of these programs, and they mention including free SHS, to see how best they can be optimized and become more efficient. So this is an admission by government that in the context of an IMF bailout, because we want their support, as part of our enhanced domestic program, we will be reviewing the free SHS and other policies for two reasons: to optimize it and to make it more efficient. The question to ask is, so what will a reviewed free SHS policy look like, or what should it look like? The finance minister in 2018 gave us a hint what it should look like in an interview with City TV, and in which he says, persons with the means should be given the opportunity to pay fees for the awards, while the government collects data to determine which segments of society benefit from the free SHS policy. So that's his view, that one of the ways you can review this, give those individuals who can afford to pay, let them pay, right? Let them pay. Gather data to make it a bit more solid so you can target the policy a bit more. That was Colonel Friata's initial thoughts on this. So that could be one of the things the government can do now that our hands are tied and we're going to the IMF. So that's one. Another thing you could do is to do a separation between the tuition and feeding. Government could say, we are taking tuition, so the tuition will be covered by the policy, but feeding, as some of the parents are already asking for, the parents will take that up as part of their costs. So that will lessen the burden. And then you could also say, separate day students from the boarding students. Now, free SHS covers everybody else, right? So you can say, for example, that for day students, government is going to pay for you to go to school free of charge. But if you're in boarding house, then your boarding costs will be borne by the parents, right? So that is possible. These are possibilities when it comes to what we are going to do with reviewing it. I'll ask my guest first of all, should it be reviewed? But even before that, a question about the problems that we are currently talking about, the food crisis. Can you say it's a direct result of the burden of free SHS? If the answer is yes, so what do you do about it? Considering that we are currently having a conversation with the IMF for a bailout. My guests are joining me. I'm very delighted to say that Kofi Asare will join me. He's the Africa Education One. Professor Evans Mensah is a man that, of course, when it comes to education in this country, has shown a certain fortitude and is a preeminent brain in terms of trying to deal with the reforms, and he's been there, he's done that. I am very delighted that he can join us tonight for a conversation on a very important matter that affects our children, 1.2 million of them. And so I'm happy that Prof can share thoughts on this very important subject. We'll also get to speak to the CHAS themselves, because I want to understand the nature of the problem. And so hopefully by the time we end, we can get a clear picture of what possibly government could do with the program as we go to the IMF. Stay with me. After this short break, we are back with my guests.